Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for today. We're going to be talking about agentic procurement and the rise of the procurement engineer. So to get things kickstarted, I'd love for our speakers to quickly just introduce themselves. Nikhil, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me. Good to be here. My name is Nikhil. I'm an analyst. I work for the Hackett Group. I was formerly part of Spend which got acquired by the Hackett Group last year. So I spend a lot of my time just sort of understanding what's going on in the procurement software market, whether in, intake and orchestration, CLM, source to contract, the whole sort of, scope. And spending a lot of my time, obviously, lately understanding AI and what people are doing and how it's adding value. So really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Hey folks, I'm 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 Siddharth. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Spendflo. So over the last 5 years, we've actually run a fairly large procurement practice where we helped companies buy, manage, and optimize all of their spend. And over the last year and a half, we've actually built Flow, which is our AI procurement workforce, to help be a capacity uh, a multiplier for procurement teams across the world. We're now working with hundreds of customers, deploying AI use cases across your entire intake to pay lifecycle. So I'm really excited about the conversation today as well.
Super. So just before we get started, some quick housekeeping from my end. We will be taking questions at the end, so be sure to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will address as many as we can. There will be a few polls along the way, so do engage. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to interact in the chat. And yes, the recording will be shared within 48 hours post the session. Quickly going to walk through what our agenda for the day is. What we're going to do is first talk about some of the main pain points that all procurement leaders may be facing today and why that's not necessarily going to go away. And what we perceive to be the answer, agentic procurement, and what that would look like. And with that role, what is the new with agentic procurement becoming the new focus? How does the role of a procurement professional change? So we're going to talk about what it takes to become a full stack procurement engineer. And then finally, what is that engineer going to run and how we at Spendflo are building that out for you, right? So with that in place, quickly, I just want to pass it over to you, Nikhil. To kick things off, could you tell us, what is procurement? What do procurement teams look like today? And how is that really going to change with agentic procurement? Or what are the problems that they're facing? And yeah, what does that really look like in practice?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to take that. So procurement teams today, we'll talk about a little bit more on later slides, are not necessarily, resourced or staffed adequately. So there's a lot of workload. There are a lot of things they have to worry about. And the good news for them is that the software that's available on the market is actually becoming quite advanced and is able to handle a lot more use cases that were not possible, a year or two ago. And that advancement has happened quite quickly. That being said, the issues that have plagued procurement departments for, years and decades still exist, unfortunately. So you still have the problem of spend being committed before procurement is actually involved, and procurement departments being forced to essentially go through with deals that they didn't even negotiate. You still have contract auto renewal happening. Even if you have a CLM solution or something that tracks your upcoming renewals, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be notified in time. You're going to go through the proper process to see if there is an opportunity to negotiate or potentially look for other vendors where applicable. PO reconciliation still only happens when something goes wrong. This matching process is still somewhat manual for a lot of organizations who might not be leveraging technology for it. And as a result, problems are not noticed until it's too late and invoices are paid when they shouldn't necessarily be paid. And then finally, shadow spend is still an issue, of course. And there's just a lot of purchases, rogue purchases that are made throughout the organization that aren't necessarily approved, not going through the proper processes. And this can happen whether or not you have the right technology. It's more of a process issue than anything else. So there are obviously quite a few problems that are still relevant to procurement. And while the technology is a lot better and the procurement teams in some cases have, the right amount of people, there's still just a lot to manage. And that leads to all these problems. So we do have a poll up
Right.
right now, as you might be able to see. I'm just kind of talking about each of these problems. But before we move on, Sid, I want to know if you had any thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, I can give you a real world example of we had we have a customer, fairly large professional services company, and most of their spend, unfortunately, you always think that you kind of have all your spend in place, but the biggest challenge was having access and visibility into contracts in order to manage the spend was the biggest challenge that they faced. So the assumption was, okay, great, you think you have maybe 50 or 60%, but in reality, you can only you're really actively managing only 30% at that capacity. For this particular customer, that was the case. So as soon as the what we realized is procurement teams always knew where the savings were. They just needed the time to go and execute against that. So we actually ended up over the last, say, 18 months when we worked together, they're now managing about 70% of their spend is actually managed. But and that's led to, on for every for about $40 million of spend that they're managing today in that customer, the savings are actually becoming best in class as well. So I think that's the path that it does take a little bit of time. And the fix was never was never a memo telling people to loop procurement in earlier. It was making the right path the easy path in intake where they already work. Make sure that it's really easy for your end users to actually get this done. Make real-time support available through an agent available. Just like support them through the process. So if you have something when they think of it and they're able to get a real-time answer, so they don't have to wait for an answer from people, that alone leads to a massive level of adoption from our experience as well.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a good example because these aren't new problems, obviously, and the
No.
tech has existed in the past to, like you said, to get the spend under management and make sure that everything is going through the right process, but it's just a matter of actually executing on that. And like you said, meeting users where they are, encouraging them to use the proper processes, obviously, is always a good thing. So it's good to hear that that's something that you're starting to see more frequently. Uh, yeah, I think we can move to the next slide. So this slide has one of my favorite statistics from the most recent edition of the Hackett Key Issues Study, because I think it's something that everyone can relate to, everyone in procurement can relate to. And that is the fact that workload is increasing year over year, but budget is not increasing at that same rate. And the stat in particular is there's a 10% year over year increase in workload, but only a 1% increase in budget. I know of a lot of companies that are actually seeing a decrease in budget to their procurement departments. And the workload is universally getting bigger as we've just been talking about. So one thing that's important to note with this trend is that kind of the elephant in the room, right, is workload's increasing, budget is not. How does this impact the actual procurement staff, the actual employees, right? And one thing that I want to make clear is that the CPOs that I talk with, and I know Sid and Spendflo that they agree with this, are that they don't really want agentic AI and this new technology in the long run to actually replace people. They truly do want it to sort of augment and allow procurement departments to spend more time doing the more strategic work because we have the technology now available to automate so many things that used to be really manual, like supplier onboarding, for example.
Yeah.
Things that used to take hours and hours now can be done in minutes with pre-configured forms or agents that guide you through it. So overall, it's just worth noting that the workload is getting bigger. The budget is not necessarily getting as big, but the people, I think the long-term vision is the same for a lot of these companies, and it's really just to empower them to do more with what they already have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're right. And like from the CFO seat, it's not really a staffing problem at all. It's margin that's the major challenge as well, right? Like every late deal is overpayment that shows up in the P&L. Anything that you miss also shows up over there. What they really, I think CPOs and CFOs and controllers, all they really want is, can I make sure that my teams are focusing on spend that moves the margin, instead of, say, chasing POs or invoices or renewals or approvals, right? Like that is the work that they don't want their teams to be working on. And that's how they look at AI as well. Like how can it be the word I keep coming back to is a capacity multiplier for my teams.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And Uh, this is, it's not a new phenomenon, whether in procurement or beyond, is to have this kind of relationship where you're asked to do more, more work without necessarily having more resources. But, as noted on the slide, historically, these conflicts generally lead to a new role or a new, way of working, right? And we'll talk more later, you'll talk more later about what that means for procurement and, the idea of a procurement engineer, but just something to
Yeah.
keep in mind. So we can go to the next slide. So just a few stats here on sort of the future of procurement, agentic procurement. These are all, pulled from different companies out there. But what we're seeing already is basically a massive increase in the amount of processes that can be automated, as we were just talking about, whether that's, PO automation, approvals, reduction in cycle times, and just overall a reduction in the manual work that is needed. This is something that, as we noted a couple slides ago, is becoming a lot more prevalent because of the fact that modern software, modern procurement software, is better equipped to meet users where they are in a more, self-explanatory way that doesn't require as much training. It can just kind of walk you through naturally what needs to be done. So that's a major benefit. And another thing worth noting is that it's not just about, the fact that it's easy to use, but it's also that these new tools don't necessarily require you to log into a new platform every time you want to do something. In a lot of cases, they're integrated with, Microsoft Teams or Slack or email or whatever it is that your company uses so that most users, the casual users, don't have to worry about new logins and passwords. They can just work the same way they already did, but just, do it in a specific channel or tag a specific account in order for it to get processed. So these trends altogether not only increase adoption, but also improve compliance because people are actually using the processes that have been laid out by, the procurement department or whoever it is that set up the system. So overall, there are a lot of different use cases that AI can add to procurement and can increase automation, of course, and we've talked about some of them. But the main theme, the main takeaway here should just be that this is already happening. This is not necessarily a future-looking statement. These are gains that organizations are realizing right now. So before we move
Yeah.
on to it, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think like the one thing that I keep hearing from leaders as well is what will my finance team say or what will my CIO say? Where is the controls? But uh, uh, so I'd like to also mention this early and to everybody as well. Agents are still software at the end of the day. So every action can get logged, policies enforced inside the system, not in someone's memory. There's segregation of duties still hold. You get a full audit trail. Touchless does not mean uncontrolled. It means the control lives in the system instead of someone's inbox. That's the difference now, is that now it is live and it's actually happening. And you don't need like Google's engineering team to run this. That's the one thing that I would just caveat is that this is actually possible today for large swaths of customers as well. So, but the one piece is in order to transition this to actual action, the operating model does change a little bit. Someone has to own it, and that's the part nobody has named yet. Like that is the actual problem to put this live. So I think if Nandi, if you move to the next slide, um, you know, it generally in it at every time there is an efficiency wall, it ends up producing a new role. And this is what I see across the board, right? Which is um, when this happened to engineering, there was a DevOps role that kind of started, which is they absorbed the CI/CD pipelines, and the engineer emerged to configure, ship, and own the system. The number of developers just increased, honestly, but the productivity per developer also moved up, right? So it wasn't the function of, oh, great, I don't like, I can just like this changes and I can replace developer. No, that's not actually how it worked. It changed what they spend every day on and what their team spent every day on. The role actually evolved, and it also affected how their team's roles also evolved, right? So strategic sourcing is still going to be extremely critical. You're going to have different layers of this stack. And the same thing happened in the go-to-market side. There is a team called the GTM engineer, which is, sales used to kind of have to do the CRM automations, figure out what the data enrichment was, do all of that work. Now the GTM engineer actually has emerged and the role has changed, the number of sellers have actually increased, and they've also made become more productive. You could now drive, now the expectation is, hey, you don't close $1 million, you close like $2 million, right? Like how do you actually improve the productivity of one of your team members as well? And the procurement engineer is the same, right? They are going to absorb all automations and agentic AI in terms of configurations. Audit owns the system, but it is going to become critical because this new, you have the ability to seriously automate every repeatable low judgment work that happens often enough, and a new operating model. And that hybrid role ends up running the function, and it ends up becoming the orchestrator of that function, or becomes a really, really valuable part of that team. And that's the role that we think is going to get created, and is actually being created. And they might not have the name of a procurement engineer, but I have a feeling that a lot of people here are already trying to do this work across the board as well. Nikhil, anything you wanted to add here?
Yeah, what you just said at the very end there is a good point because procurement people by nature, I mean, obviously you and I both talk to them all the time. They're very scrappy, intellectually curious, always willing to try new things. And that's already happening with AI. They're already doing quite a bit around, experimenting with agentic AI. So I could definitely see this, it being called this role. I also think that procurement is a pretty natural place within the company to own agentic AI because of how many different areas that it can impact procurement specifically. Not that it can't impact, sales or marketing, whatever else. I just feel there's more of an impact in procurement because of the way that it impacts the full source to pay cycle.
Mm.
So, at such a high degree. So I definitely agree with you, and I think it's an interesting way of framing it, but it's very valid. I could see it happening, and like you said, it's already happening a little bit.
Yep. And you can go to the next one, right? So I think this also is important. The two things that I just want to start with is, in order to become a procurement engineer, and what we've seen be successful, we've essentially evolved an internal procurement practice to now becoming a procurement engineering practice in terms of how we actually approach problems, how we deploy AI, how we think about it inside our customers. So what really has changed is, the two things that are very important. You don't need a CS degree, and you don't need to know how to code, right? Those are the two things that have really evolved to make this role possible, and it is possible even today. So I think the first and foremost is, um, you have to understand the full source to pay loop, right? Request to PO to contract, request to contract to PO, to invoice to payment. If you can draw it out on a whiteboard, you're ahead of most of the folks as well. It might seem like a very linear process, but we all know that that's not what it happens. You have to draw all of the pieces that happen outside a theoretical system, right? You might have a system, but there's a lot of work that happens outside the system, emails going in and out, who you need to follow up with, what are the assessments, what are the other systems that actually touch this process. By nature, the entire procurement process is already it is already combined with emails, data fragmented across various systems, and documents. Those are the three things that AI is now becoming incredibly, incredibly good at. So what you really need to understand is, what is your process? Can you actually whiteboard it? And if you understand where the nuances are in that process, you're already really ahead of the curve, right? And the second thing is, this is the piece that I would really encourage folks as well, is to think in systems. Um, Now that you know which problem to solve for, how do you design a system that handles this every time without me in it? You have to ask that question without me in it. You could probably design a solution really, really quickly and say, great, like, just bring it up to me and I can keep handling the exceptions. But the point is that you shouldn't be involved in that process. When it is, when you think in systems, you understand that, hey, if this happens, this is what we need to do, and then encode it back into your into memory so that the next time it happens, it auto processes as well. So thinking in systems is really important. And also it's like this, right? When a system breaks, if you don't if you've not designed the system, you won't know where to look when it breaks as well. So that is the piece that I really want to encourage folks is that agents in AI, it requires attention and maintenance and evolution, like anything, right? But here you have the ability to really, really rapidly iterate on top of the process. And three, but not the least, um, I think you need to understand what to delegate and what to own. Agents can run the routine, humans can own the judgment. I would highly encourage the first levels of automation to be, hey, following up with suppliers, scheduling a call with the supplier, invoice automation, or contract enrichment, renewal negotiation. Help get you to a point where you take your really strategic resources and make them very, very actionable, make their lives easier in that process so that their judgment plays the role, and the agents actually just help with everything that they need in order to spend more time making those judgment calls, right? So that I think is third most important piece, right? So um, what when I say you don't need to be technical, I really mean it. But let me be honest about what it takes, right? Configuring a workflow in an afternoon and not in 6 months is what it really means. The skill is in coding. It's saying exactly what good looks like so the system can enforce it. If you can write the rules, the system will run it. All you really need to know is what you want, what good looks like, and you can really test, iterate, and deploy on a continuous cycle, because the only way you're going to learn is like by actually running this as well. So, and the test question I would always ask is, what would have to be true for this to run without me? That is the piece that I honestly ask every single time. This is the way that we design workflows inside. This is the way we design workflows for the customer as well. And this is the question that we always encourage customers and my product and engineering team to always ask as well. So, Nikhil, anything you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you as the procurement person will know what's best for your organization in terms of process and what's going to work and what wouldn't work. So experimenting and iterating, like you said, is going to be really helpful. And definitely want to emphasize, like you say, you don't have to have a coding background. I mean, in fact, most of the people I talk to who are experimenting with this don't have coding backgrounds. They're just, using the latest models and just using natural text. And it's very powerful. It's very effective what you can do with these systems these days. So yeah, just taking the plunge and just diving in and working on something is the best advice we could give, I would think, because you got to start somewhere, and I think it's very helpful when you figure out how to start maybe with one process and get that right, and then go from there is usually the best way to do it.
Awesome. And do you want to go to the next one? Yeah. This is so this is a quick kind of three-step process that I would recommend everybody in order to become comfortable with like becoming a procurement engineer, right? Start with what you have. You probably have access to ChatGPT, Claude, or like Copilot, or anything that you're using today. This is like simple, right? Like start drafting the RFPs, vendor briefs, negotiation summaries, contracts, clauses, evaluation scorecards, renewal negotiation emails, like very, very simple use cases that I think it should be single turn, single pieces. Uh, it's just quick agentic solution. It might not be a workflow, but when you start using it, you start to understand the nuance of what is getting right and wrong as well. Those are some really simple use cases that we've seen customers have success with. And then the second layer of this is add your own context and data. This is where it gets really, I'd say this is where the true power comes in, which is if the AI had access to all of your like your contracts, your supplier master, your and if you have a preferred vendor list, even if you have invoices, purchase orders, whatever you can get access to, running the AI across all of these different components that, in the source to pay life cycle, that is very, very important. That is the knowledge that makes the AI a lot more a lot smarter as well. So building those workflows on top of your existing data and using that data as knowledge for the agent is actually moving to the next level. And the third and final one is moving to touchless processes. Think of it like intake to PO without a human in the loop for follow-ups, and it is more for humans for approvals and summarization. You might need it, but reduction of the number of touch points with humans would be a great process to run. Supplier onboarding is another one. Accounts payables is another one. Uh, Order confirmation is another one. Renewal negotiation triggering following up with approvals, contextually following up on approvals on email or Slack or Teams, wherever you're working on. These are all touchless processes that you can start running on this front. I might be saying it's really easy to kind of do this, but Nikhil, I think you can add on where you've seen success with other customers as well that you work with.
For sure, yeah. I mean, definitely starting kind of like I said in the last time, starting small and then building up is always helpful. But the second point, second column here, I think is the most important personally because it kind of works in multiple ways. One is that you want to ensure that whatever it is you're using for AI is integrated with separate data sources, whether that be your ERP, your source to pay systems, non-procurement tools even. The more data it has, the more likely it's going to be to deliver results, as you said. And the second thing is having even further context, more specialized data is also really helpful. So I know, one thing with Spendflo and other providers, of course, is that it's more than just, a procurement tool. It goes beyond that by adding data from, third-party sources, benchmark data, things like that for purchases. And that's really valuable because that's where AI can come in and even recommend new strategies rather than simply just executing whatever it is you tell it to do. That's where more of the long-term value I think it's going to be. So, it's not so much the more data, the better, because you want to make sure the data is of good quality. But uh, still, though, you want to err on the side of having more data when it's available to you, making sure it's properly integrated with all of your systems. And then, of course, once you have all that figured out, the specialized data that I'm talking about, that's what really kind of takes it from, something that's helpful to something that's a true, game changer and moving more beyond just adding marginal value.
Nice. And if you don't mind. I think this is where it's going to become really key. This is like these are use cases that we've deployed with customers that we've really seen amazing results with. So one of the customers with just supplier onboarding, it would take weeks across 4 roles, and it's the global multi-entity financial services provider. Here the biggest problem was they had a supplier portal, but there's kind of three things that are broken, right? Which is the internal coordination of who needs to act on what and when was kind of broken as well. So that internal coordination between like your security, IT, finance, procurement teams was kind of broken. And then there was the external coordination with the supplier, which is, hey, supplier hasn't filled this, but and we need this information. Supplier asks a question, who needs to reply, who owns that? That external coordination was actually broken. So it was actually fundamentally a coordination issue. And for some lower end, like I say, lower dollar value suppliers, they would just send you a link, right? Like, and say, hey, this is like my trust center, or this is my this is all my information. Go and pull it from here. And so then it would fall on the supplier onboarding team to go and actually go and fill this information, pull this information, manually kind of transition it into your vendor supplier portal, and then push it to your ERP. Those are like some that coordination issue, as well as like pulling data from various sources to fill in your supplier portal with the right information was our amazing agentic use cases where we help them set up that internal coordination, the external coordination, as well as the ability to pull publicly available supplier information to actually enrich and speed up that entire process as well. So I think it was like what really happened was we really picked one person on that team who owned this workflow this coordination workflow, understood it really deeply. We did a 2-day kind of whiteboarding with them and their teams, and we deployed this in about 3 to 4 weeks, honestly, and to get it like really live and start testing it for one particular category. And now we're expanding categories with that particular customer as well, right? So this is like a really great use case that I would encourage folks to go after. The second use case is just around renewals and the renewal negotiation side as well. So we've all received renewal emails and emails from like different systems or so. The propensity for us to click it and fill up a large form is very, very low. So we end up having to do it. We keep pushing that. It might be the renewal might come in notification might come in 90 days, 120 days before. There is no notification sometimes. We keep pushing it until the last minute, and then procurement has to like go and follow up. Hey, please, do you need this? What do you need? And then procurement has to follow up again. Procurement has to follow up again in order to actually get that information in order to make a renewal decision. That process is also very highly repeatable. It happens every single month. High volumes. Low judgment as well, right? Like all you're really asking for it's a coordination problem again, which is someone has to follow up with the owners of these systems to figure out, okay, and give them context on what they signed up for before, what pricing they have, potentially even usage data on if it's a software vendor. Provide all of this context for the requester or the stakeholder to make a decision on if they want to renew, what do they want to renew for. They don't want to renew, why they want to renew. So we ended up designing like an email agent for renewals that has this contextually follows up like how a human would with the stakeholders. And if the stakeholder just replies to that email, it automatically creates a PR, right? So and then the coordination is internal, and you can run that entire coordination engine as well. So that's another use case that we see high leverage, and it's a lot of folks sourcing folks spend a lot of time just chasing buyers, spend a lot of time chasing stakeholders for this. And then the third piece is, I think this is accounts payable processing, which is we have a manufacturing customer who handles maybe 40,000, 50,000 invoices in a year. Invoices come in, they need to understand, okay, great, they have a PO, but just matching against the PO was not enough, primarily because they had SKU level pricing information that was like in their contracts, and they had rebates in their contracts. How do they actually extract all of this information and make it available at the point of processing to make like intelligence on, great, I can process this invoice. This is some discrepancies I see. This is opportunities to save. This is how I can actually process this as well and make it drive value from that process and drive savings through that process as well, was the piece that we had. It was split across like various members of that team. Like, sourcing would have to get involved because nobody would know who bought it or where this is actually coming from or what price they need to be paying for it. AP would have to follow up over there with sourcing and actually get that done on the purchase order. So now that entire process is now available in the agent, and the agent is actually processing whatever the exceptions are. That's when it's actually bringing it up to the teams. So these are like incredible use cases that I see where a procurement engineer, if they're going in and starting, these are the use cases I would actually start if I'm in an organization and say, hey, pick any one of these. It's probably a problem at your company in some way or fashion, and then you go after it. Nikhil, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I don't have too much to add other than one use case I've seen that is really effective is definitely what you were talking about with the renewals. And I really like the email agent that you mentioned, just kind of taking a lot of that more annoying, busy work out of the hands of the user and making the agent do it is one thing that has definitely provided a lot of value. Even just kickstarting that process a little bit earlier is one thing that has been helping a lot of companies because sometimes they do realize the renewal is coming up, but they start the negotiation too late and it ruins their leverage. So having that be more of an agentic process is definitely something I've seen delivering real results already.
Yeah. Nandi?
Cool. I think with that, we've come to the end of the conversation. Thank you both so much for that. We'd like to open it up for questions at this point. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to drop it either in the chat or in the Q&A widget, and we'll be happy to answer them. Also, we've got a little poll up for everyone. If you'd like to see more of like how Spendflo can help you with some of the use cases that Sid just outlined, just answer the poll and we'll reach out to you and give you like a walkthrough of what we've got going on. Maybe to get kickstarted, I do have one question here for both of you. Um, Let me just read it out for you. I feel like the CEO and the procurement lead are coming into the conversation of agentic procurement wanting very different things. One wants to cut costs and the other wants to do more strategic work. Does agentic procurement actually deliver both, or does it depend on who actually owns the narrative internally? Either one of you can take this,
Yeah.
or both.
Yeah, I mean, I can add some
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Uh, it definitely helps, I think, when you're in lockstep with the C-suite and you're, co-owning the narrative. But if that's not possible, I would say yes, agentic procurement can both deliver savings and, free up people to do more strategic work. It's definitely possible. The only caveat is that the AI landscape is evolving so rapidly that the price of using, various models and tools is going to change. I would think in the next few years. I don't know exactly how or when, but that's what we don't know, right? The good news, however, is that there's already, real value being delivered. And I have seen, like we were just talking about in the last slide, I have seen a lot of examples of procurement people that are freed up to do more of the strategic work. So that alone, I think, would help convince, a CFO or CEO or whoever it is that they report to of the value. So it can do both. I think it's too early to put like a blanket statement that it like always does one thing or the other. But I'm personally optimistic that it'll continue to go in that direction.
Yeah. I had like interestingly, the CFOs or the CPOs who I speak to actually are kind of aligning on like the CFO obviously cares about cost, right? Like that's the first thing that they care about. But the interesting piece is that um, um, they're seeing this in their own teams and then the CPO is like, hey, I want to leverage my highest paid assets and my highest leverage assets and my team and leverage them to be able to do more work. That's where I really want AI to actually play a role, is enabling my teams to become capacity multipliers rather than rather than trying to like drive costs down on processes that already are like I know I'm optimized for those costs already. Like I know how to optimize it. Those are low hanging fruit. Like that's not where they see the maximum ROI. They see the maximum ROI in making like their strategic sourcing as resources, their all of those resources and teams are much more AI native, and that because again, let's face it, right? Like you're always going to be resource constrained in some way or fashion. So if you drive if you drive through AI on these use cases and take all of this work out of their plate, basically you now each person can now manage more spend than they ever have before as well.
Super. Okay, so the next question that we have here is the procurement engineer framing makes sense to me, but how do I get my CFO to see this as an investment in the existing team and not a reason to not backfill my next open headcount? Sid, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Yeah. Like one of the pieces is that I it is a right now a top-down initiative across teams to essentially become AI native across the board. And the thing that I'm seeing is the like obviously the directive when it comes from the board, the first person who gets affected by it is the CEO, but the second person is actually the CFO. So they are actually a lot more incentivized to show examples of how their teams can become AI native. And the piece is that right, like you have to pounce on this now. That is the thing, right? Because in a year from now, or like in a couple of months from now, it's soon gonna go away, and that opportunity is gonna go away where they're like, I want to see results. Now we actually have that limited, like just a small opening this year, I'd say, uh, to experiment, where the CFO doesn't really care about the ROI, doesn't really care about what the outcomes are, not as much, right? Like what they really care about is hey, I want this to experiment. I'm okay to experiment. I'm okay to see what it fails, succeeds, or whatever it is. and I want to see what the potential ROI is. But you will need to give them an answer in about 3 to 6 months time. But you have 3 to 6 months. This is a very, very limited window that everybody has today.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Like you said, eventually they're going to want to be more results oriented, but right now it's early enough where you have that freedom to experiment. So I think the hope would be that you start using something if you're not already, and that it does lead to results that are, impressive enough that the, CFO sees it as an opportunity to actually further invest in procurement because it's delivering, savings or whatever the metric is that you're measuring. So there's another. I understand the question, but there's like another spin to it where if the tools do work and the processes do improve, you could make the argument in reverse. So I understand it, but also I could see it going either way.
Cool. I think that's all the questions we have for now. And yeah, that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, Sid. I think this was really insightful and definitely some very actionable items for everyone to take away. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and we will send you the recording within 48 hours. Have a good one.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nikhil. Thank you, Nandip.
Bye.